Court earlier on unanimously ruled against the opposition MDC's bid to have the election results overturned. For more on this, I'm now joined by Professor David Moore from the University of Johannesburg. Your thoughts, having listened to what the Constitutional Court had to say, Prof?
Well, thanks, Vuyo. The court judgment itself looked very professional. You know, they were saying we don't have enough material evidence to say that the election should be annulled. There was too much secondary evidence. And the shots on Thabo Mpofu looked pretty serious. And Kanangoni looked pretty happy. The streets, from what I understand, since noon hour, the police vehicles, the armored cars and so on were taking care of business on the streets. The MDC has accepted the results, although I heard from your correspondent on the radio that Douglas Marzora has said, yeah, we accept the results, but we don't really believe them, you know. So there's still a lot of discontent. The tweets are flying around, or the Twitters, and the fake news is flying around about how Justice Malaba was given tons of money last night by Chiwenga. You know, these stories, as happens in Zimbabwe a lot about election times, there's a lot of rumors floating around. But I think this has been the last stand for the MDC for now. I don't know what their plan B is, if we get a coalition government or they just decide to stay in the opposition and regroup, which I think they will have to do.
It's difficult, isn't it, to argue, you know, against, you know, some of what the court, Chief Justice Malaba had to say, that the applicant made several startling allegations, but without referring to, you know, source evidence, and that in the final analysis, it was the applicant that had to convince the court to set aside the election result. And from where they sat, the MDC didn't do that. Yeah,
the sort of criteria seems a bit different from, you know, you usually hear if you cast enough doubt on something like that, the court should decide against it. But they didn't have the ballot papers. They said we didn't collect the ballot papers because we thought they were already, you know, jammed, jiggered, faulted, rigged. They declared there was this issue that they didn't get the application in on time. They said they had the sheriff going for it. They say the evidence that ZEC presented was contradictory from their CD, from their TV announcement and so on, and they actually changed the results. But in the end, none of that seemed to matter to the court. And as I said, it looks convincing. But if we go back and consider all the other, you know, pre-election, the intimidation in the countryside, getting the chiefs to line up people before they vote, all that sort of stuff, even the gerrymandering of the constituencies that went back to 2013, and the structure, the militia without their uniforms intimidating people, that sort of stuff doesn't seem to count in the actual contestation at this point. So it's the court of public opinion and the court of international opinion, of course, is another battle that the MDC was fighting. And Thabani Mpofu looked pretty convincing in that presentation. You have 20 minutes and you get another 5 minutes. Can you actually bring in, you know, they said you didn't bring in the teachers who supposedly didn't vote because they were intimidated. And you don't have them as witnesses. So that material evidence, and even then, if they'd had enough concrete evidence, would it have been material? Would it have affected the materiality of the election? And Malaba says at the end, the court doesn't make the decision, it's the people. But it's the court deciding what the people said, you know. So there's kind of tensions even there in what the court said.
How much of all of this, or the situation that the MDC finds itself in now, has got to do, or perhaps it's not so much of the MDC's own making, but perhaps it's, for lack of a better word, its tardiness may have contributed to this, because knowing fully well what was at stake, one would have thought that they would tick all of the obvious boxes. You know, like, for example, if you have party agents, perhaps you're not, let's say, as the court acknowledged, that they may not have been represented at all polling stations. But where you are, you take samples, you make sure that you've got the numbers, and then you can like cross-ref or use those as samples. And seemingly they didn't do any of that. Or you declare a dispute, there's a recount, or if there's a voting, you know the voting population at this particular polling station. If the numbers look inflated, then you declare a dispute and you query that and you take that all the way, and none of that seems to have happened.
Well, there was that one in Chikutu, remember, where the candidate demanded a recount and won, and then he was chased by the militia. So you're always in those spots. But I think
point was made.
The point was made, and I think you have a point, that the MDC came into this relatively unprepared. I mean, they concentrated on the presidential election. They didn't really support the constituencies. There were sometimes more than one candidate in the alliance. Remember, it's an alliance, and it came out of all the turmoil before and after Morgan Tsvangirai's death. I think the MDC will really have to sit back and really think about how to avoid. I said way back in, well before the election started, that the 2023 election would be the one that counted. And then, of course, we had the coup. I think this was September. I said this sitting here. I wasn't with you. The feeling was then that this was a generational contestation. And, of course, even in ZANU-PF it was. And then Nelson Chamisa came to represent the new generation, aside from AC Lumumba, who started a little party for a while, but then decided since Mnangagwa, his guy, won, the party would know. You know, so there is the generational bulge or crux is going to really be there in 2023. Now, I think there are two things that both parties must do. Both parties are still factionalized. So in January, the MDC is going to have to regroup, have, you know, Tendai Biti is actually in another party. There's going to have to be a new constitution, new leaders, that sort of thing. ZANU-PF, too, is going to be regrouping by October, because remember, Mnangagwa even thinks that he might be impeached because there's subterranean G40 people who are there. I've always said that après Mugabe, la déluge. After Mugabe, the storm. Mugabe could hold these factions together. Morgan Tsvangirai, at times he could, but at other times he couldn't. You know, Thokozani Kupe, that whole thing. If Emmerson Mnangagwa can do a Mugabe for the next 5 years even, he'll be very lucky. So I think we're going to see these tensions in both political parties, plus the huge economic crisis, which you can't find another currency to take on like they did in 2009. There is no money there. This is, you know, the funny electronic money that they're going to have to fix a lot. And ZANU-PF has lost credibility with August 1. Now, are the international donors, the USA has already put something out, at least the people who were on the mission, Todd Moss and the IRI and so on. They said, we're going to push, we're going to wait. Now, what about the British? Even Peter Hain, involved in that business deal with Mnangagwa, was stepping back after that August 1 a murder of 6 or 7 people, some in the back, some weren't even demonstrating. Can they regain that credibility quickly enough to revive this economy? Will they be really open for business, or will they be doing more things like command agriculture? I heard some stories, rumors, projections earlier today that Nkosazana Moyo, who did fairly well as an independent presidential candidate without a party, would he be the governor of the Reserve Bank? Would David, now I never heard any rumors about David Coulthard, but you know, he played this wonderful role as Minister of Education in the GNU. He's not a senator now. Would he be a Minister of Education? Would ZANU-PF reach out like this, not only to the MDC, but to independent, reputable actors to really come back from that devastating moment in August?
And inspire some confidence.
Confidence.
Okay, we'll see whether that indeed happens. Professor David Moore, thank you very much for your time this evening.